In this conversation, we're exploring what happens when organizations stop treating release readiness as a one-off project activity and start treating it as a continuous capability. We'll unpack why so many teams are still trapped in firefighting mode, what that cycle does to people and performance over time, and where automation actually changes the game, not just in testing, but in confidence, enablement, and leadership trust. We'll also challenge a common misconception. Automated testing alone doesn't create confidence. Real confidence comes with testing is paired with automated user enablement, so people aren't just told the release is safe, they experience it. And finally, we'll talk about the real goal, turning quarterly patches into a non-event, calm, predictable, low risk, and business as usual. If you're a CIO, transformation leader, or ERP owner who wants to move from release anxiety to release flow, this episode is for you. David Zimmerman, welcome back to the ERP Perspective. Great to have you with us again. Good afternoon, David. Great to have you back on the ERP Perspective.
Hey, George. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
I was just mentioning in the intro, obviously the second episode with Opkey. I know a few things have happened since our last conversation, but for the audience watching, would you like to break down sort of what Opkey have been building? I know you've had a few personal changes at Opkey as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so a lot happening in AI space. So innovation is rapid. It's a full sprint. So a lot of things we can share today in the context of our discussion. Happy to unpack that. Recently my role has expanded and within Opkey. So overseeing our solutions team and our solution engineers, but also our functional product, interacting across product, marketing, and sales. So kind of interacting with everyone and expanding that role, and happy to bring those insights and the way I'm collaborating to share, how we are impacting these releases and things customers should be thinking about and how we can leverage technology to best support customers and partners. So happy to be here and love to get into the details.
I've been speaking to a few guys internally at Opkey, and you guys have some really exciting things planned this year. New releases and new products that you're bringing out. The title for the episode, "Firefighting to Flow." Obviously, how automation changes release readiness. Why did you guys want to sort of engage on that topic on this episode?
Yeah, absolutely. When we think of the products that Opkey is bringing to market and the challenges that customers go through, partners go through, when you think of these large enterprise systems that are managing all your core functions across HCM, ERP, supply chain, everything that goes into operating your business, a lot of customers, as they move into the world of cloud, they're going from on-premise solutions where they could control these upgrades. I talked to customers in the past that maybe did upgrades every few years, some every 5 years, some even 10 years, believe it or not. And they had a lot of control, very highly customized systems. And so they didn't have this rapid change that was a part of their life. And when you think of, again, your core systems being operationally resilient, it's a big, huge shift. And working in the consulting space where I came from in my previous career, we had to really help customers adopt the cloud way, get used to this new mode that they were in as they operated the system. So once we've implemented, we turned the lights on, they were live, the different cadences, the rhythm they need to get into, how to do that at a level of excellence. And I'd love to share today, examples of how I've seen customers do that well and the best practices, and also customers that didn't necessarily have the right focus, and ultimately how Opkey is better enabling customers to be able to handle this change in multiple different avenues so they can, with the team that they have, again, elevate to that level of excellence, which is critical to make sure you're getting return on investment as these systems evolve, because it's constant. The old adage is transformation doesn't stop at go live. And especially in this world of cloud, transformation is ongoing. So I'd love to dig in and talk about some of those examples and how Opkey's helping.
Opkey's sort of helping people move from that reactive patch chaos that people deal with to some more of a calm, continuous release readiness. I know you've called it the calm platform. I know we'll get onto that later on, but yeah, I think it's fantastic with what you guys are doing. I mean, with recent Workday and Oracle patches that just been released, why do you think release readiness still puts so much strain on IT and business teams, and even in mature cloud environments?
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, when thinking about this, it's something that they have to adopt and inherit and be educated as they're going through an implementation. And this is really part of the partnership with their SI as they're building, as they're adopting, doing transformation, modifying their business processes, because ultimately these systems are just containing the processes that make up their business. How do they make sure they're operating? And through an implementation, you want to move the needle You want to move toward a more modern organization, leverage industry trends to help retain a workforce, operate in a way that's more efficient, give a better user experience. That's been the name of the game for the past 5 to 10 years. It's all about the employee experience, because if employees are happy and the different personas who use the system, they're going to be happier in their daily work. They're going to be more efficient, and that's going to eventually trickle down and impact the customers and ultimately the operational excellence of the business. So, as we gear up for these releases, and if we think, some cloud products are quarterly, if you think of Oracle, some are biannually or twice a year. There's even some solutions like EPM and others that are monthly. So there's different cadences customers have to consider. There's no playbook that they're going to get from these enterprise vendors that tells them exactly what to do. Now, I will say these enterprise solutions do a really good job of making it accessible to have white papers, new features. You can get that information leading up to release. So there's a lot of research that goes into that. But let's start to break down what customers should be doing to do this at a level of excellence. And then what we can do is start to incorporate how does AI agents automation help facilitate that to relieve some of the burden or the manual efforts that go into that rigor.
Yeah, 100%. I think that area of confidence that these AI agents can bring, but also your services, it
Right.
helps so much. And like you said, when the users are more confident and more enabled in this environment, the work's obviously going to be of a higher quality.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it starts with, again, this playbook. And so if I could just paint the picture of what are customers going through, let's say they're gearing up for this release. And a lot of times there's education involved in making sure customers don't have a blind spot or a gap in their process. Because if you don't have that awareness of what you should be doing, you could get years down the road very quickly, making sure you're operating your business, keeping the lights on, nothing's breaking, and then realize you actually haven't kept up with the evolution of these systems. And ultimately, what that means for a CIO or for a leader is the return on investment. If I'm not getting the latest capabilities, the whole point of moving to the cloud is I want to keep up with innovation. I want to get the latest capabilities that help my business. I mean, at the end of the day, we're serving business users and the organization that executes these processes day to day. So, just to touch on a few things, whenever we get an upgrade, number one is, are we operationally resilient? And when you think of that, is all of our processes working as expected? Anything is input into our system. Again, customers from on-prem or these legacy solutions had more control. You don't have much control. You have to take these upgrades. Some enterprise applications let you defer, but only to a certain extent. And some are more rigid than others. But at the end of the day, you do not have much control of pushing off these upgrades, because these enterprise applications need to be able to service these products, and they need to make sure all their customers are on the latest patch or upgrade so they can make sure they're servicing appropriately. So the first thing is regression testing. And this is something that's been talked about for quite a long time. You need to make sure you're testing all of your processes. It can't be a subset. And when customers typically do this manually, they have limited resources. Depending on the enterprise application, there's varying amounts of time. So in Oracle, for example, you have 2 weeks. So you get 2 weeks in a lower environment before it's going to hit production. So that's your window in time to make sure everything's working. So you're being, as you said, proactive and not reactive. And when it goes to production, you're ahead of it. Other solutions like Workday, for example, you get a give or take a month before that large feature release hits twice a year to do the same thing, to interact in a sandbox preview tenant and understand what are these new features, what does this mean. So the first thing you should do is all of the current processes we have in place, not just testing the critical ones, that's definitely important, but testing everything. And that's where it becomes very challenging for customers when they think of how many people do we have. A lot of times it's a side of the desk job. So they don't have dedicated testers. What they do is go back to the project team members who are part of the implementation or specific go-to people in different departments and say, hey, I know you got a day job, but I need you to set aside time to test. So it does put a burden on the employees. It's something that they have to do, again, as a side of the desk job, and it's usually a limited scope. But when we think of our processes, we can't think of what we do every day. The critical processes like, can we pay people? Can we run our financial processes? Can we hire people? You need to think of all the processes, some things we do daily, monthly, even once a year. That might be a complex process that isn't often run. But if there's a failure in that, again, to your point, you're going to be reactive. With automated testing, and Opkey's been doing this for over 10 years, within any technology in the customer stack, what they can do is have test suites on the shelf. Some of our customers have 4,000 or 5,000 test cases packaged. So immediately when you get that upgrade in a lower environment, you just run our agents. They test all these different processes, and you get analytics and readouts on, was there any issues? Was there a failure? Is there potentially a technical bug or something that's out of our control we found? Or is there something that was changed in the configuration that we need to analyze to understand why this is occurring? So
Yeah.
instead of doing that over a 2 week period or a month period manually and only looking through a keyhole and doing a piece of it, you're able to do it comprehensively in a day or two and be able to then have an action plan and have the remaining time before it hits production to either work with the enterprise vendor to solve that problem or solution it internally to make sure those issues do not go into production. So
Yeah.
I'll stop there. There's more to cover, but I just wanted to touch on the
Yeah.
test piece first.
Yeah, well, 100%. I mean, I was going to get into what patterns do you consistently see in organizations that are stuck in that firefighting mode around patches and what that cycle does to teams over time. But I know
Yeah.
you covered a few areas there. I mean, if you get people away from their day job and you say, right, I need you to do this, we've got a deadline to do this, what is the quality of that testing going to look like, first of all? And if you're asking people to change their job responsibilities to come and do this testing, and it's going to affect structure, it's going to affect people's day jobs,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
But are there any
Absolutely.
other sort of patterns that you see when people get into this firefighting mode?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's about making sure you're doing it comprehensively. And to your point, a lot of times I've even talked to customers where they're gearing up for go live and the folks who are going to test it quarterly or during these releases aren't even aware that's a part of their job description now. And it's
Yeah.
something that they're having to now make sure those employees are on board with that. You have to have very clean test scripts. So if you're doing it manually, you have to have a repository of guides and scripts to make sure
Mm.
they know what steps to follow. And you have to maintain those scripts. So as things change, you have to keep up with them. So there's a lot of manual work there. And usually, again, it's a limited set of test cases. And if a customer's thought through it correctly, they would do it based on priority. What are the things that absolutely can't fail? But then you have varying levels of quality based on the individual. When it's humans testing, there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be maybe some people who have do their due diligence and are very detailed in tracking and finding issues. Some may be a little less detailed and just try to get through that to get back to their day job. So you're going to have varying levels of quality. And ultimately, what it can lead to is attrition. And that's something no one really likes to talk about. But a lot of times, whether it's in an implementation or putting this type of burden on employees, you can cause employees to say, this is what I really signed up for. This is you're putting too much on me. And you could lose those employees. And then what happens is you have to then hire someone, onboard them, ramp them up. And so there is a revenue impact to getting that person up to speed, making sure they're doing it with quality. And that turnover can really impact that process.
So, I mean, there's so many risks when you try and rush this, or it's seen as sort of a last minute fix, or right, I forgot about this. We need to change it. There's so
Yeah.
many risks and errors, as you mentioned, that can happen. Changes when organizations stop treating the release readiness as a one-off activity,
Yeah.
and stop viewing it as a continuous operating capability instead.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where this is the education piece. And I've seen this vary from customer to customer. Some are doing it and have that rigor and that process in place. They have everyone on board, and it's almost a project management where you have to make sure, okay, this is hitting, everyone's got their assignments, make sure you're communicating it back. And so again, when it's manually, you're having to manage all these people and you're having to make sure it gets done. There are a lot of customers, I've actually met customers who just skip it completely. And that's kind of scary. And you
Yeah.
come back to the risk factor. I mean, when you think of automation and AI and how we can incorporate software to enable our team, a lot of the conversation is, okay, we want to create efficiency. We want to reduce the cost. We want to make it faster and more streamlined. But the risk is the biggest one. So I'm glad you hit on that.
Yeah.
It's risk of the quality, but the ultimate downstream risk is what happens if a critical process fails and we have to react. And let's say it hits production and it's something that absolutely cannot stop for an hour or a day or a week. Can we afford to let that happen? So there's the risk of us operating and with resilience and making sure we're ahead of that. And there's also risk to the user experience. Again, we talked about these systems, the user experience is critical. There's the stress it's going to put on those end users, those personas who expect the system to be operating the way it should. And they're the ones who are then raising the red flag and saying, we got a critical problem. I can't complete my process. Then the administrators, the IT department, HRIS, whoever is supporting that is having a fire drill to rush to get that fixed. So it creates stress, anxiety. It affects the adoption of the system, and ultimately the risk comes back to the business because if certain processes fail, it could actually have legal implications.
Yeah.
And we don't really like to think about that, but I've
Yeah.
seen customers who are just bypassing testing completely with a hoping nothing breaks. It's not if it will break, it's when it will break. So you've got to have that process.
I mean, we prefer the more positive instead of the top 5 fails in ERP. Try and put them on the positive side, but it's so true. We see so many lawsuits, so many situations where people don't test and then a project fails and it has these massive
Right.
implications on a business, which
Yeah.
can effectively bankrupt a business. It can totally ruin an organization if
Mhm.
this testing isn't done properly. And it's just close our eyes and hope for the best. But
Mhm.
yeah, as you mentioned, there's so many massive stories out there of how this can go wrong.
Absolutely.
I mean, in your experience, I know obviously Opkey does so many different areas of automation, but where does automation have the biggest impact on
Mm.
release readiness? And when do organizations tend to underestimate what's actually possible?
Yeah, yeah, and that's where I'd like to expand this outside of testing because testing is definitely key, but that's just the first step. And when you think of doing this at a level of excellence, there's a lot more that goes into it. So let me, George, paint the picture of the other things customers should be doing, regardless if you use automation or not. And then let's tie back in some of the other solutions and things that Opkey is doing to help best serve customers and partners. So we talked about regression testing. Is everything that's already in our system working as expected? What often can happen is you introduce new features. This isn't just for releases. I will also call out this is for patches too. So depending on the enterprise solution, you might have monthly patches. In some cases, Workday, there's weekly service updates. They call these non-eventful updates that are being put in. Sometimes they can have small changes, like field level changes. Sometimes they are fixing issues that other customers have identified. And so when you think of bugs or issues, there is a case where it could be widespread. Every customer in that enterprise application experiences the same thing. There could also be a subset of customers who experience it, and then there could be what we call anomalies. So maybe out of thousands of customers, only one or two customers have an issue. In these patches, in these releases, they're putting these fixes in as well as new feature functions. And when they fix one issue, it can cause another issue. These enterprise applications are doing their due diligence to test everything before they deploy a patch, but they can't predict how it's going to impact every customer. So running those regression suites is going to first make sure something was input into our system. There's things that could happen we can't predict or we don't have control of. Let's identify them very quickly. So that's, again, just emphasizing the regression testing. But then there's this whole piece of new features. When we think of the new features coming in, again, they release white papers. They make it really easy to look at it by application. So you can line it up to the businesses and the different departments that use these applications. So you can read through it. And, just for example, in the latest Oracle release across the Oracle Cloud Fusion, there's over 400 new features. In Workday, I believe in this latest release, there's over 350 features. So that's quite a lot to
Yeah.
consume. So the first thing you have to say is what is being forced on us, that almost a default features. These enterprise applications say, we're just turning this on. It's not going to disrupt your business, but it's being turned on. You need to understand what it means to you and are you going to use it or not, but it's going to be there. Then they have what they call opt-in features. Now, opt-in is we're putting it into your system, but you have to take an action. You have to take an action to turn it on. It could be as simple as enabling a profile option, or I like to call it turning on a switch. So I turn it from no to yes. I want to enable this feature. And some of those actually come with additional setup. So in these white papers, they'll say enable the feature and then do these 5 extra steps to make sure it's functioning in your system. So what they need to do is analyze these features, which it can be overwhelming. They need to, in an IT department or HRIS or someone sitting between IT and the business, they can't make decisions for the business because at the end of the day, these systems serve the business users and the leaders who run their processes. It's just to facilitate those processes. There has to be, and again, we have 2-week window or at max a month. They have to make sure everything's working, number one, with testing. They have to then analyze these features, go to the different business leaders, say, here's let's say it's recruiting. Okay, there's 40 new features, 20 of them are enabled out of the box, 20 of them we have to decide, what do we want to do? Do you like these features? Do you want to put them into your process? Is it minor change? Is it significant? Have you been waiting for this feature? You align with the business. Then that team has to go turn it on in a lower environment, validate how it works, even maybe have that business user test it out so they understand the change. They have to get sign off. And then they have to migrate this to production. Now imagine doing that across finance and supply chain and HCM and all the different applications. That's a massive task. But if you're not doing that, you're not going to keep up with the evolution of the product. And it first has to be adopted by the business users who are leveraging it. They have to understand it. And Opkey not only brings test automation with our testing agent, we have a configuration agent that helps speed up how you make these changes in a system and then how you migrate them through your environments. You'll never just do it in production. You have to do it in a lower environment. You might move it across a couple environments to validate it and then move it to production. So there's a lot of manual configuration happening over and over again. And remember, we have this tight window that we have to accomplish that. So that's another example of how Opkey's configuration agent is helping across configuration management, different pieces that go into that to speed it up and to make it more accurate, and also to have an audit trail of what did we turn on, when did we turn it on, and how did we migrate that into production. So that's the second piece I wanted to highlight.
How can a business know what's possible if they don't have the time to look at it? If they're rushing around trying to fix all these things and be in that place of readiness, how can they know what's possible? How can they know how to innovate their business? How can they know how to keep up with the latest trends or the latest functions or the new features? If you've got 400 new features, how are you going to get the time to understand if they're actually going to be beneficial to your business while you're trying to fix all everything else and get it ready for go live? It seems like an impossible task. If you can have that automation aspect and delegate those different functions and have them automated, it gives you that time. I mean, if you can give yourself time or take time in the automation aspect, you're giving yourself so much time to understand these new features, how they operated. And I guess that is what is so underestimated, is the freedom that will give you from implementing something that can automate this part.
Right, right. And while we can help, with automation, reducing manual effort, adding, again, saving on the cost of that, allowing a smaller team to be able to do that with less manual work, less errors. So the risk factor, right? Less human errors, less risks that could get into production if we're doing this across a larger team. But a lot of companies have limited budgets, limited resources. They can't hire a team of 5, 6 people to do this. When the SIs implement, and I lived in this world for over a decade, these upgrades are happening in an implementation. So the SIs have this incredible amount of focus on this because at the end of the day, they have to deliver based on their contract. And so they are doing all these things at a level of excellence because they have to. And SIs who partner well with customers will expose the customers to that process to educate them. So let's say there's 2 releases or 3 releases in an implementation. You're involving the customer to say, here's how we do it. Get geared up because this is how you're going to do it. That leads customers a lot of times to need managed services, not just to understand what the features are, but to get advice on there's 40 new things in recruiting. I kind of understand it, but what does this really mean? And that's where some subject matter expertise comes in. And, while we're solving a lot of the manual inefficiencies, having that advisory lens is still very powerful. But what I will say is, making sense of, I think you brought up a good point. How do you analyze all this? It almost seems overwhelming because moving the configuration, and again, we have a config agent to help with that, is one piece. And what I want to share in some exciting news, and I'd love to come back and show you this as this rolls out. In the next month, we're going to be rolling out a free product. It's called Intelligent Release Advisor. We're releasing a light version for anyone to use. We're going to put it on our website. We're also going to have a pro version that can have a subscription tied to it. And the light version is going to leverage AI, pull all the across, and we're starting with Oracle and Workday, and we're going to expand, but it's going to be able to pull all those release notes in. It has robust dashboards to say what's opt-in, what's defaulted, what is categorized by these different areas, how does it line up to different modules. So you can best report and read that out to your business to help those IT departments more easily consume it and read it out to those business owners. And then we have AI Copilot experience where you can ask a question, say, what are the top 5 things I need to focus on for accounts payable or receivables or core HR. So we're enabling that, and we're going to give that out very soon. And then the pro version, what it will do is actually understand the context of a client's environment. So instead of just pulling those 400 features and helping you dig in and sift through them much more efficiently, what we're going to do is be able to export the design of a system. We're going to be able to compare that to the new features and filter off the things that aren't necessary for the customer to review. So let's say out of those 400 features, across all the cloud, they're only using 5 or 6 applications. They're only in the United States and the UK from a regional perspective. It will filter down and say, out of those 400 features, you only need to focus on 180 based on the applications you're using, the regions you're in, and it filters down and it actually simplifies how you consume that, making it much easier to make decisions, and then leveraging our config agent to actually move that configuration. So some exciting feature I just wanted to share that's coming in the next month or so that customers are going to really be able to leverage.
Fantastic. Yeah, like I said, I'm really looking. I mean, I've got a little bit of intel from the inside. I know I can't talk about it too much right now, but that, like I said, that new product, yeah, is very, very exciting for the community and what it brings, the benefits that it does bring. I mean,
Absolutely.
I know we were talking about automated testing. I mean, why is automated testing on its own not enough to create that real confidence after a
Yeah.
release? And how does pairing testing with an automated user enablement change the outcome for the business?
Absolutely. And I've, kind of to take it to I think the last theme here, because we've talked about regression testing, operating, with the processes you have, enabling these new capabilities. And, we talked about making sense with this intelligent release advisor, creating efficiencies with how we migrate that to production. But we've also got to test those new features. So the automated testing comes into play to say, okay, we've enabled across our applications 30 new features. We can leverage the testing agent to test those features, add them to our repository. So then our regression suite is evolving with the changes we're making. So I just want to call that out. But to your point,
Mhm.
adoption is huge. I mean, change management is a big part of implementations. And often I found that's the first thing customers would reduce as far as scope because of limited budget. It would always kind of hit me in the gut because I always knew customers were going to regret that decision when they went live. I mean, training, adoption, communication, they say that end user will accept either a new feature or a user experience within 60 seconds. I mean, if we think about how we use our phones, you open an app, you navigate for less than a minute, you already know if you like it or you don't. So we have a small window to get adoption. And the customers I have talked to who are turning on new features, that's where they would stop. They would turn on the new features, line up with the business, roll it out. And if they were to analyze the usage of those features, I think it would floor them that no one's using it because you haven't taught them how to use it. We can't expect to turn on a new feature in recruiting or a new feature in finance and just because it's on the screen, someone's just going to play around. I mean, if you were to analyze users and how they interact with the system, there's probably a small percentage who would be explorative and click on things and see what it does without training or guidance. So the training layer that you shared is huge. So change management should be an ongoing, living and breathing part of the business, especially as a system evolves as rapidly as these cloud solutions. And so the third agent I really want to talk about is our training agent in our platform. And you mentioned CALM. And so for those who don't know what that stands for, it's Cloud Application Lifecycle Management. So these agents all work together on our platform to help as you implement, operate, and if you go through optimization efforts to do maybe additional modules or mergers, acquisitions, kind of point in time mini projects as you continue to live and operate in that system. But with AI, we've been able to unlock the ability to have sustainable training that never gets stale. And if I could just paint this picture, let's say in an implementation, you build 100 training guides for different parts of your business. You need that adoption when you turn off the legacy system and the new system. That's critical. After 2 or 3 releases, those training guides are absolutely outdated. And what happens is clients never use them again. So they spend all this time and money for that initial adoption, which is critical, but no one ever uses them again. So let's think about, well, what about those new features? How are end users adopting that? What about someone who's just being onboarded and is new? How are we making sure that a year later they understand how that process works with changes that have come in? Maybe there's new AI capabilities, new fields, there's even sometimes a new user experience overlay. And so with our training agent, whenever you run these regression tests, and it could be thousands of tests, we create job aids with screenshots, we mask data, we put it in simple to follow steps and categorize it into meaningful sections. We can translate it into up to 9 different languages. And it's all AI generated because we understand the business processes through our testing agent. You could have thousands of job aids that are auto generated. And every time the system takes an upgrade, you get the latest screenshots, the latest capabilities, the latest fields, and there's zero maintenance and it's always going to be up to date. So the power of that is not just initially the adoption, but the adoption ongoing for the years to come.
I mean, I'm just thinking now it saves the client so much money going into trying to build these new training programs, right? How do we do that? But keeping it up to date as well. Keeping it up to date, obviously, once a new patch comes out or there's these new features, if that
Yeah.
training AI model already knows that information, there's new questions and the new ways of working. That training agent already knows that. So I mean that, oh yeah, I think that's fantastic. I mean, from a new release, let's say Workday or Oracle, they have 300 new features.
Mhm.
How soon will that training agent know that information? Is it soon as it's released? How quick is that configuration?
Yeah. So what's amazing is we're not dependent on the release information coming from Workday or Oracle. What we're doing is we're building it for the customer. Now, all these features are coming out, but the customer, remember, they've tested their core operations, they've turned on features. And again, with our intelligent release advisor, they've sifted through it. They made decisions with the business. They've turned on a subset of those features. And some features they may have put it in the backlog. And that's important to track too, because what happens, George, is, if you just turn on certain features, you get to the next release, you're scrambling, you get to the next release, a year goes by, you could have a backlog of 100 features that you forget about. And then maybe you don't want to do it in that release, but a couple releases later, you might want to come back and turn on that feature. So having a backlog in a process is important. But if you remember, when I mentioned testing, it's not just testing the existing processes. When you turn on these new features, you should leverage our automation. We have something called test discovery, where if you've turned on new features, we read the design changes, we will recommend test cases in our gold repository, and we'll say, here's the test you need for that new capability, that new transaction, that new page, that new feature. And so what you're doing is you're adding those, let's just say they turned on 40 new features. You would add 40 new test cases. You would automate the testing, add it to your existing library of test cases for the next release. And as soon as you run that test, all you have to do is check a box or flip a switch, and it builds a job aid for that new test. So immediately when you run that automation, because there's power in having that to run on a consistent basis, you will now have 40 new guides for the new features. You can distribute that in multiple ways. You can export them as PDFs. You could load them into your learning management system and assign them to certain personas or certain departments. We even have a feature that's called Nav Assist. So we have a plugin on the browser called our companion app, and you can interact with Opkey in the browser. So you could be in Oracle, in Workday, and say, you know what, I forgot how to create a position or how to hire someone. I kind of got a couple steps in and I just forgot. It will pull up the user guide. It will also say, do you want me to help you and assist you in the navigation? You say yes. It will highlight on the screen each click, and it will give you information, tips, information on what you need to do. And so you're executing a training in the flow of work. But the most powerful thing, because there's other solutions out there like WalkMe and other solutions where you have to build these scripts, you have to build these click-by-click pathways manually. Again, the power of these agents working together is we already have the steps in the testing agent. So the training agent will have these Nav Assist experiences automatically generated. And every time the system evolves, you'll get updated Nav Assist guides, updated job aids with even a field level change, everything. So there's zero maintenance. Honestly, from a training perspective, there's zero effort to build them and there's zero effort to maintain them. And that's something that's really exciting because we haven't been able to achieve that until we've built this AI solution coupled with our testing that allows us to unlock that.
I mean, even simple things like when there's a new upgrade or there's a new patch, sometimes features is the same feature but has a different title. And then the old training that you've had or the old training documentation, it's an old name and then you can't find that feature and then you can't find that. But with this training agent that's constantly updated, it saves that. And also the management as well. When you've got a team of maybe 50 consultants, 100 consultants, and there are going to be times where people need assistance or they need a reminder on a certain process. But with this plugin, it saves everyone time. The consultant, also the program manager or anybody else on the project.
So we have customers who are taking this on. I mean, you could have 100,000 users, 50,000 users, and you could have this for different personas. So if it's an employee updating their address, if it's a manager going through a performance review, if it's a HR specialist making an administrative change or a finance analyst doing some type of transaction, instead of typically what you do is you have to pick, okay, we only have the budget and the time to do 100 guides. Okay. All the business teams, you get to split this across, you fight for it. You get 10, you get 5, you get 15, and they're having to pick and choose. What we can do here is we could have job aids and guides for thousands of processes, and they're ready and available whenever you need it. And so if I imagine there's processes you do every day, helping an employee update their address could happen any day. Updating, they had a life event, they just had a child or got married or something like that. We can't predict, that could happen any day. So this Nav Assist could be there instead of them having to reach out to HR or ask for IT help. So you're dramatically lowering the service tickets that come in for how do I do this? You're empowering that end user to feel like, hey, I can do this on my own and I don't have to go out and ask someone, which makes them enjoy the system experience and feel like they're training as they're executing. And then if you think there's some processes that are very rare. And so when you have limited training guides to build manually, you don't have the ability to For example, there's a thing called global transfers. You're moving someone from one legal entity to another, from one country to another, but you're transferring them in the org. That typically requires a ton of steps, from, moving their benefits over, making sure you move their PTO balances over, all these different things, and it can be very complicated. And so you might not even, when you're building it manually, you could not have training for that, which is a high risk transaction. So having thousands of these guides just on the shelf waiting for someone when they need it, they can query and say, look, I haven't done this in a year. Can you remind me how I do this global transfer? And it's showing them all the steps and all the important pieces of that process is huge, right?
Yeah.
To make sure it's done.
100%. Is that readily available now, or is that an upcoming feature?
That's available for Oracle and Workday now, and we continue to expand in other enterprise applications. And again, this is coupling with our testing agent, and it's something our customers are really finding to be a game changer. So really exciting.
Fantastic. I mean, so moving forward, when organizations successfully move into like a flow-based model for release readiness, what actually changes for the IT teams, business users, and leadership?
Again, a lot of times they're constrained on resources, they have tight time windows. So there's a lot of pressure. And what it's doing is it's being a pressure relief valve to allow these agents to support and help the users who are owners. And in this case, it could be IT, could be another department sitting between the business and IT, to make sure that they can do all this at a level of excellence. Honestly, when you explain all these steps without automation, without these agents that Opkey brings to the table, customers almost get paralysis or anxiety, because they're like, we just can't possibly do this unless we hired full-time resources, full-time FTEs to support and execute these different things, because we don't have months to do this. We have a very tight window. So what it's doing is it's allowing them to achieve this level of excellence, which helps the IT department be successful, make sure the end user experience is top notch. They're not finding issues. You mentioned it earlier. It's moving from reactive to proactive. It's reducing the risk of something breaking in the system, which impacts the operational resiliency. Who's the first person that's going to get heat for that? The people who own the system, the administrators, the IT department. Why did we not find this? You got to fix it. And if it's out of their control and they have to work with, let's say, Oracle, Workday, or any other vendor, their kind of hands are tied. They're having to work through those tickets and they're just anxiously waiting for a resolution. Being ahead of all those things is going to really help them be successful, help them do and best serve the business, to help all the employees and the users who are leveraging it, make sure the leadership has a system that's supporting those processes effectively, and then be able to achieve this level of excellence across testing, new features, and training, which, if I'm to be honest, there's maybe, I would say the percentage is less than 5% of organizations out there are able to do all three. And if you started to knock them off, training's probably the first thing to go. New features, probably not keeping up with that. And testing, at best, they're testing their high priority test cases. So they can't really achieve it without this type of solution. And so it's really helping customers take that to the next level.
There's so many different advantages of obviously you using these different models. A direct question to you, David, if you were advising a CIO or a transformation leader designing their release strategy, for the next couple of years, what mindset shift is the most critical for turning quarterly patches from a source of anxiety into sort of a routine and a low risk operation?
Yeah. Absolutely. First, it's understanding where they're at today, and it's learning from the customer, listening to them, not just telling them this is how you have to do it, really understanding, how do you do this today? What are the challenges you're having? And when you start to surface that, it's a bit of education that needs to happen. And there are companies out there who are doing this at a level of excellence, but what I find is very robust IT teams, HRIS teams, or teams that sit between HR, finance, who are the liaison between the business needs and the system needs, and they've hired ex-consultants or subject matter experts. So when you think of these massive billion-dollar companies who have hundreds of thousands of employees, global companies, they can afford that, and they need to operate with resilience, and they need to best support the business. But when you start getting down to mid-enterprise and growth customers who have maybe 10, 20,000 employees down to 2,000, even hundreds of employees, it becomes almost impossible, right? It's first understanding where they're at today. Did they learn from their SI the best practices? Having that dialogue. Have they seen issues in production? How is the adoption happening? Are they monitoring the usage of new features? Are they keeping up with new features? So when you surface that then gives us an opportunity to share how we can best help them achieve that excellence. So sometimes I call it a blind spot, because what you don't know is ignorance is bliss type thing, right? So if you're not thinking about it and maybe you've been in a situation where you haven't hit a critical failure, they can think, okay, we can just live like this for the future. But that's just not how we can be thinking when we're dealing with PII data, payroll, how we're managing people, how we're managing our finances, supply chain. I mean, these are critical things that run a business. So it's learning from the customer, educating them on the things we talked about today, and then presenting to them how these agents can help them. And again, I want to come back because you hit on this from the beginning. When we think of automation, when we think of AI, we think of speed and enabling users to make decisions faster. We're a big believer at Opkey of human in the loop. We don't ever want to say, just run these things and don't have any oversight. I don't think in the AI world that's a good way to approach AI. And I think a lot of us are starting to learn that even in our personal lives with these large language models. You've got to still have critical thinking. You've got to analyze it and question what you're hearing and make a human-based decision. So it's educating them, it's presenting this to them, it's showing them how it can help and enable their team so they can achieve that level of excellence. And so when we get there, customers coming back often realize the biggest piece of support that they need that they were turning a blind eye to is risk. I mean, we've talked about it. It's risk to the business, risk to their employees, to their end users, risk to putting more burden on their team members to do these things manually when it's a huge challenge when you have a smaller team. So time and cost are definitely factors, but risk is the biggest factor. And customers are starting to realize what Opkey can bring to the table is to help mitigate that risk and then achieve this level.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, like I said, I know it's the second episode with Opkey and obviously yourself, David, but I love the things that you bring into the community and the message and the insights from the services that you provide. I mean, that's all the questions that I have for you today on the second episode, Firefighting to Flow. But is there anything else that you'd like to give to the community or anything else that you'd like to mention before we wrap up this episode?
No, I'm appreciate all the questions, George. It's always a pleasure to be on here. Look forward to the next time we get to speak. And we got to talk about the platform. If anyone has any questions, please reach out to our team. I know you're going to share information. You can reach out to me directly. You can reach out to Opkey. We're happy to demonstrate all these solutions to you, get into the weeds of how you're doing it today, how we can help, and meet you where you're at. And, just excited to share more as this year we have a lot of innovation planned. I know we talked about the Intelligent Release Advisor, so a lot more to come and look forward to our further discussions.
David, I'll put David's LinkedIn profile below and obviously some more information around Opkey. And this has been the ERP Perspective. Thank you for watching.